as Jason mentioned, I work for a conversational AI company, and I will never forget the first time that I presented insights to one of our clients. I joined Authenticx 2.5 years ago. So this was about 2.5 years ago. I found myself in front of a cross-functional leadership team for a large manufacturer presenting conversational insights to them. And the insights were around a new product that they had launched on the market that was highly publicized and a little bit controversial. And within the first 15 minutes of the presentation, the senior most kind of person in the room stops me and says, Leslie, you just shared with me some examples of what our customers are saying when they interact with us and call us about our product. Are these just one-offs, or like what does this represent? And I was able to assure them that they were not one-off examples that he was hearing in the room of his customers, but they represented a third of the customers that were calling in to their call center. At that point, he says, Leslie, I've never heard our customers like this. You have my full undivided attention. We captured their attention right in the beginning and kept it throughout the entire presentation. What we saw, and again, this was my first time, so I was a little new to me. I've presented customer data for over 20 years, but this type of reaction felt really new. And what was happening is the chat was blowing up with people kind of commenting, reflecting, saying, we need to look into this. New people started joining the meeting. And I later found out that people were just starting to send the link out and saying, you need to hop on this call. And action started happening in the meeting, in the presentation where customer insights were delivered. And the other thing I would say is I spent exactly 0% of my time having to defend the data that we were sharing, of explaining kind of the approach and besides saying that represented a third of their customers, that was about the extent of the defending that I needed to do. Now, some might say that, oh, well, Leslie, this example, this first experience of yours was because of their culture. They have a culture that's highly engaged in their customer voice, and you just witnessed that. Or it was the product launch, and they were highly kind of sensitive to the nature of the insights that they were getting. But it wasn't either of those. So I've now been at Authenticx 2.5 years, fast forward. And in my time, I have continued to see a similar type of response in presentations. We call them insight sessions, where we're delivering insights to our clients. And I've realized in this 2.5 years that there are two things that are creating this response, that are creating action happening in the presentation. One is the data source that we're sharing as a company that's helping healthcare with customer experience. It's not survey data. The other is the approach that we're using. Our communication approach is data-backed storytelling. So we're going to spend some time on both of these. I'll just touch on the data source. We're not going to go kind of deep into that. We'll spend more time on the data-backed storytelling side of it. Before Authenticx, I had spent 23 years in the world of kind of customer experience strategy, and I had delivered countless voice of customer presentations of synthesized survey data. And I had never kind of experienced the reaction that I see even today through the work that we're doing here at Authenticx. Now, on the data source side of it, Authenticx is a conversational AI company. And if you were to go Google conversational AI, chances are it would pull up companies that use AI to assist or replace a human in a conversation. And that's not at all what we do. We are a conversational AI company in that we're a listening company. So we use artificial intelligence to help us listen to both sides of the customer conversation and to glean insights and understanding about the customer experience through those conversations. Our application of conversational AI is much broader than just replacing a human in an interaction, because it's really an enterprise-wide business intelligence source. We are just exclusively in healthcare by choice, because we feel our founder is from healthcare, and we feel like there's the greatest need there as well. So I mentioned that before Authenticx, spent 23 years relying on survey data as the voice of the customer. And I was seeing how people felt about survey data. They often questioned the approach, the research approach. Well, what about the 90% that don't respond, and all of this? And I found myself spending a lot of time defending the data instead of helping the business take action on it. And I stumbled on this research from McKinsey. It's from 2021. And it kind of encapsulated what I was feeling as a CX practitioner. And in this study, they found that 93% of CX professionals use survey-based metrics as their primary means of measuring the customer experience. I was the 93%. They also shared that only 15% of the leaders were fully satisfied with that metric. And that's exactly what I was experiencing when I would go share voice of customer data throughout the business. Conversational data has kind of flipped that upside down. We don't spend our time defending the data. I've discovered that business leaders have a completely different reaction to conversational data. And it's because the data it's unsolicited. These are conversations that are already happening within the businesses that we serve today. And historically, they've been stored and ignored, but now through artificial intelligence and machine learning, there's capabilities for harnessing that source of insight that the business has never been able to do before. It's representative of all calls. So we're able to analyze every single interaction. It's inclusive, it's representative. It is immersive because it allows us to pull on other senses besides just visual. We get to hear the voice of the customer as well. And then what we see in conversations is that it gives us the root cause that survey data often can't answer. Survey data is great at kind of pointing us in the direction, but conversations and analyzing them give us the why. Why is that the experience that customers are having? And then the last thing I'll say, and then we'll shift to data-backed storytelling, is conversations are also a renewable source of insight. The definition of renewable is it's not depleted when it's used. And the reality is our customers are having conversations with us every day. When we use the customer, it doesn't get that conversation as a source of insight. It doesn't get depleted. They're conversing with us through the phone, through chat, through email, through Zoom meetings like we're in right now. So it's a source that never gets depleted within the organization either. So first thing, data source is a huge driver of inciting action within the business. The second element is really around how insights are communicated in the business. And I'm not seeing any questions pop up yet. So I'm going to keep going. But if there are any questions, feel free to chime in. Jason, I saw you come off mute.
Yep. Yeah, no questions. I'm just confirming for you just in case you can't see the
okay.
chat. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Feel free to type in questions along the way. And then there's plenty of time at the end as well for Q&A. So the second element is really around the communication of insights. And there's a lot of things we know about storytelling, but wanted to highlight 4 of them with you today. First is we know through research that after an audience hears information, 5% of the audience will remember the statistic. Almost 2/3 of them will remember a story. So stories hold in our memory side of our brain. We've learned from neuroscience that data alone doesn't activate the parts of the brain that shift our behaviors into action. And that's because data doesn't hit the parts of our brain that motivate or persuade us. We've seen through research that 1/10 of business professionals in different companies only 1/10 use data storytelling to communicate analytical insights, despite their belief that doing so will give them a competitive advantage. And in that same study, they talked about how the top reason for not using data storytelling is because the people within their business lack storytelling skills. So we know that an audience is going to remember a story. We know from neuroscience that data alone isn't going to prompt our behaviors, our actions, and that research shows that most people aren't using data storytelling because we lack the skills to do that. So at Authenticx, this is a problem that we want to be a part of solving. We are really hoping to help democratize data-backed storytelling because we believe when we put the art and science of data-backed storytelling into more hands, and specifically customer experience professionals, that we will exponentially amplify the voice of the customer in the business. And so because of this, we've got a new data-backed storytelling certification for our clients. It's a multi-day certification, which I've pulled just a couple. We don't have 2 days here right now, but I pulled a couple of the tips and tricks from that to share with you here today. So we're going to stay pretty high level, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We're going to touch on answering these 3 questions. How can stories incite action? What constitutes a data-backed story? And then what does a data-backed storyteller do? So first thing, how can stories incite action? A gentleman named Granville Toogood. He's a leadership communication coach, and he's been a consultant for a lot of the Fortune 500 CEOs. He's also the best-selling author of The New Articulate Executive. And in his book, he introduced us to this concept of the conscious mind in our brain. And the conscious mind gets activated when we're reading data or reviewing reports or looking at product specifications. It's the part of our brain that processes information like schedules, categories, and things like that. So dashboards are an example of something that it activates our conscious mind. When we use a dashboard, we get information, but it doesn't tell, this dashboard that you're seeing here, it doesn't tell us the story. And because of that, it's not really driving us to take action. We see data, but we don't really understand the why behind it, which is what stories do. Jason.
Hey, Leslie, we have one question. It's not on the dashboard here, but Would customer compliments also be used in storytelling?
Absolutely. Yes. Love the question, and a big yes, because just as much as people want to know what the problems are out there, they also want to know what we're doing well at. So yes, highly encourage customer compliments, strengths, all of the above. Celebrate your wins and leverage them. So dashboards are activating the conscious part of our mind, and this is what it looks like. So our conscious mind activates our language centers of the brain, and these are the parts that process language. It translates data to make sense out of data. When data is present, what happens in our mind is it always the same. In our brain. Our brain doesn't know how to balance the data, just processing it and reading it. Now, activating the conscious mind is good. We have to activate the conscious mind, because when we do that, it allows us to make good decisions instead of bad decisions. But that part of our brain, it's not inciting action. And that it's because for us to act, we need to have attention around the data. We need to understand prioritization and have motivation from the data. And we need to be able to recall the data, to have memory of the data. Granville Toogood also introduced us to another part of our mind, which he refers to as the primal mind. And this is the part of us that acts. It's also the part of our mind that is activated by storytelling. And so there are two components that are used to activate the primal mind. There's story elements and story structure. Story elements consist of four things. A story would have a setting, a place, a location in which it is occurring. It has characters, and in a lot of our data, those characters are our customers, different types of customers. There are employees, or things that are present in our customer interactions. They also have an object of desire, a wish, a need, and they have obstacles. So when you think about building out a story, think about having these four elements within your story. The other piece of that activates that primal side of our mind is story structure. This is how the story flows, the beginning, the middle, the end. For story structure, there is generally a normal beginning at the start. Then there's this like, oh crap moment of the story that follows by an intervention or turning point that leads out to a new normal. So as you're starting to think about crafting your customer voice story, your data back story, think about what are the normal, what's the oh crap for the business, what are some options that will lead us to a new normal. When these two things, story element and story structure, are present, what happens in our brain is our motor and our sensory cortexes get activated. These are the parts of the brain that are responsible for our senses and our actions. The insula is our emotional sense in the brain, and it gets activated because stories that contain an action and feeling are emotionally responsive as well. So when stories are present, using story elements, story structure, a different part of our brain gets activated. And what happens is the balance shifts. And it shifts towards action. It shifts towards people in the meeting starting to say, I'm going to look into this now. I've already taken this. I've pinged this person, and starting to brainstorm. And it's because stories have attention around the data. They've got prioritization and motivation from the data, and they allow us to store that as memory. As we saw before, 63% will remember the story. So we know from Granville Too Good that we need to activate both parts of our brain to incite action. And as CX professionals, it's essential that we touch on both of these. For me, I think of these less as conscious and primal, and I think of these more as activating in the audience the headspace, the logic, the reason, and the heart space, the emotion, which is going to drive action. We've got to anchor our stories in the data that connect to that headspace and share examples that pull at our heartstrings and get people to want to make changes. Because of these two is why we call it data-backed storytelling, not just storytelling, but it's data-backed, it's rooted in insights and information. So we talked about why stories incite action. Let's take a look at what constitutes a data-backed story. And we see that there are two things that constitute a data-backed story. That a data-backed story has both a macro and a micro component to it. The macro stories come from our quantitative data. And while we need the quantitative to activate our conscious mind, we do not promote data dumping. So this is kind of the like pull back on sharing all the macro data and really just focus in on what's the one message that we're trying to communicate through all of this data that we've analyzed. We don't need to share all of the kind of sausage making that went into it. Really focus on what's the main message and anchor your quantitative data in that. Then from there, use micro stories. This comes from qualitative data to share real examples that support the macro data. And I do have an example of this to share with you in a little bit. But one of the things that we do at Authenticx, and we would recommend to everyone, is using what we call montages. Montages is where we take multiple clips of calls or chat interactions, and we put them together in a series where the audience can hear the voice of the customer and hear examples that are reflective of the quantitative data that we shared with them. Jason, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah. So we have one question that refers to, like, there's a lot of data out there, the volume of data that CX generates. And the question is looking at how do we filter out which tells a story and then make the links between the exceptions. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I worded that properly. So
I think so. So I think the question is, there's a lot of data, which ones are story worthy versus just kind of the exceptions. Mm-hmm. And that gets into a little bit of what we'll talk about in terms of what does a data-backed storyteller do. But one of their roles is to find the story. And mm-hmm. I wish I had a simple, like, easy button for that. But it is a lot of, staying at the top. What are the key themes? And then drilling into it. Why is this? Getting really curious about what's happening in the data, then coming back up. Now, the other part of the question was just exceptions. So having a kind of analytical review process allows you to find the stories. You will also find some exceptions that are worthy of sharing too. I'll share one example with you. We were working with a hospital system, and we could tell that the agent on the call wasn't sensitive to the gender identification of the patient that they were talking about. This doesn't happen all the time, but it was really important to help use as an education moment for their nurses that it's an important thing to be aware of when you're talking in a situation. So that I share it just as an example that there are some exceptions that are also worthy of sharing as well.
Yeah, I think too, a lot of times we're looking at frequencies of themes and comments, right? So if you're getting a lot of frequency of a certain type of comment, that could boil to the top. And then those exceptions might be verbatim comments. They might be conversations that provide the context or the wrapper for why the data is pointing in a certain direction. So you might leverage both to, I know when I'm doing research, I'm looking at the frequencies in the data, but then I'm reading the verbatim comments to understand the context. And a lot of times the verbatim comments, even if they're a one-off, they provide a unique context that provides a route for the story or a direction for the story that helps us point to the action that we want to take.
Love that, Jason. So quick kind of wrap up on this, as you think about the next opportunity that you have to share customer insights, consider telling it both with macro data and micro stories, and incorporate that story structure and story elements into how you craft that presentation. I'm going to shift to, I've only got one slide on the role of a data back storyteller. This kind of, there's days of things that we could go into here, but just wanted to, for context, help kind of anchor in what we see as the responsibilities of a data back storyteller. The first thing, which we just talked about, is finding the story. And this is really where the bulk of the time is spent. It is looking at the data, it's clicking in, drilling down, looking at the verbatims. For us, it could be even listening to the call if we need to. It's also about looking at trends over time. How has this changed? How is it not changed? And trying to get the full context of the story. From there, you move into crafting the story, and this is where you pull on what are the elements of the story? What's the structure of the story that we have to tell? How can we tell it using macro data and micro stories to make it come to life? From there, it's about telling the story. This is really about presentation and facilitation of conversation. So gets in, you could do a whole session just on presentation skills, but also facilitation, because that's where when we facilitate conversations around our customer data, that also brings it to life for our audience. And then the last thing that often gets overlooked, we see, is around supporting the action. We do see that data-backed storytellers can play an important role in supporting the organization in the action that they take. We also hear through our involvement with CXPA that helping the organization take action is one of the common challenges of CX professionals. Supporting action is really about helping to hold the business accountable. It's things like looking at data, continuing to look at data as they look to drive changes, helping to inform their action. It's also about recording the actions that they agreed to and the insight sessions and following up on them. Have you been able to do XYZ? And helping to keep it in front of them so that it doesn't get lost in all of the shuffle and all of the other responsibilities that business people have. Jason.
Leslie, we have a great question about just the nature of qualitative data being mined. And I know Authenticx has a unique platform for mining conversational data, but could you talk a little bit about how qualitative data is mined and used in a storytelling fashion?
Yeah, so what so the mining of it would happen in the finding the story phase. And what we do with conversations is we have machine learning models that you bring in a conversation into the Authenticx platform, all of our machine learning models are kind of applied against that conversation. And so one example of a model that we have, it's called the Eddy effect. And the Eddy effect is a detection of friction in the conversation, a detection that the customer is stuck. So I'll use that as an example of kind of getting to the qualitative. So we've got, actually this year, we'll have over 200 million healthcare conversations come through our platform, which is huge. There's no human capacity to analyze all of that qualitative data. So we use AI and machine learning models to help quantify it. And then that allows us to be very selective on where we want to click into. And then from there, we can start to read through generative AI summaries, where AI is creating a summary of that conversation to see which ones do we want to put human ears to listen. So it's a process of starting with quantitative data and letting that data guide the storyteller to what they want to review, because qualitative insights can be more time consuming.
Yep. And there's a follow-up question from a different person about how would you represent the qualitative data in a storytelling
That's
fashion?
a great
Maybe you're
segue.
Gonna get there.
Yes,
perfect.
Actually, it's a perfect segue. So we've got an example here of a data bag storyteller of a story that we put together. This is for one of our large payer clients who we're focused on their Medicare members. And for this client, they were very interested in what their Medicare members were saying about their optometry benefits. And so we used conversational AI we get a lot more calls than just optometry calls. And we're able to use the AI to find calls that were just about optometry benefits or, things surrounding their optometry benefits. We used our tool to detect brand detractors within their calls. For us, we consider a brand detractor when a customer expresses something in the conversation that is a negative towards the company. And as you can see here, there are things like the website, they're having trouble resolving the member's problems. They weren't following up with the member had expected a follow-up. The agent wasn't knowledgeable. It's a mix of the common things of technology, people, and processes that were falling into the brand detractors. Now, when you go back to what we talked about earlier with the story structure, this is the start of the normal stage. This is saying, here's what our conversations are right now. This is the current state. And so we start to create that oh crap within their customer data by drawing attention to the highest brand detractor theme, with almost a quarter of their brand detractors were focused on the website and the portal. So this is the macro side of the data. Almost a quarter of our Medicare members, when they talk about optometry, share a negative sentiment about our website. When we dug into that, so our kind of find the story focused in on that, went deep, we noticed that from their Medicare members, there was a really strong desire to use self-service via the website for their optometry questions. We also heard their members say that what they wanted to be able to do and what they were experiencing were two totally different things. So this was a continuation of the oh crap. What I want to do is not able to be what I can do. In this statement, which we shared, it wasn't colored the way it is for you, but we just want to kind of highlight the story elements. We have the characters, which are the members. We've got the setting, which is the website. We've got the object of desire, which is finding in-network providers and understanding benefits. And we've got their obstacle of the lived experience. We bring it to life by showing quotes of members saying things like, I tried going online. I just was on your website. I'm wondering if I can go online to find in-network optometrists. I was trying online. This is painting the picture that they can't do what they want to do. From there, we use micro stories to bring that theme to life. And I mentioned earlier that we use what we call montages to do this. In their insight session, they heard a 3-minute montage. In the 3 minutes, they heard 7 members talk about their frustration with the website. They heard the voices. I can't share that with you because voice is a form of personal identifying information. But for us, we do have some of the quotes that they were able to hear live. So they heard their members saying things like, I tried and I don't know where to go to find optometrists. I'm trying to print my claims and optometry never seems to show up. I went to your website and it's not too user friendly. It doesn't come up. It's just medical and pharmacy. I tried going on there and I cannot find my benefits. I went to the site and all I could get is a little square that asks me who the doctor is. I can't get any other names. I was just on your website and I could not find anything about how to actually access the plan. This is the point in the meeting where things start happening. So immediately they are on their own website and they're experiencing their website as their members were experiencing it. And they're chatting, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. I can't do it either. The other thing that we did is we were able to continue the oh crap situation by helping them see the agent side of the conversation. And we noticed that it wasn't just their members that were having a hard time with the website, the agents were struggling too. So we played another montage for them that focused on the agent side of the conversation. And in that, they heard really long pauses of dead silence. And I don't know if you're like me, but that is like nails on a chalkboard. We heard a lot of agent uncertainty. We heard agents like talking to themselves, trying to figure it out, but kind of mumbling on the call. And eventually, the agents were able to help the member. But in this call on the left, it was over 10 minutes. The call on the right was over 20 minutes. So the members had already tried to self-serve, then they were calling in and getting this experience with the company of uncertainty, of being able to accomplish the task themselves. I'm going to pause there because Jason, I saw you come off mute.
Yeah. So I have one question. We in our network, we do have a lot of people who may be a one-person CX team that doesn't have a call center or maybe doesn't have AI capabilities. How would somebody potentially replicate or start to gather insights if they don't have all the fancy bells and whistles at this point? How do they get started? I guess maybe that's a better way to phrase it.
I would recommend one of two things. One is let the data guide you and focus on the one thing that is most important from that data. So if you're using survey data, it might be moving your detractors to promoters, but really kind of focus in on the one key thing. The other is to let the business guide you and develop relationships with business leaders and really understand what's important to them, and then use the data that you have available to help them and support them in their role. So I feel your pain. I've worked with a lot of solo CX practitioners, and it's about kind of doing what you can do, and would recommend either letting the data guide you or finding a partner in the business that can help guide your story efforts, the finding story efforts.
So from a data gathering standpoint, is there a place that you would start? Would you recommend starting, like if you don't have any tools at your disposal, would you start with survey data, like starting a questionnaire to capture voice of the customer and or operational data?
I would probably, if I don't have anything, I'm starting blank, I would probably start with asking some internal stakeholders, doing an internal stakeholder assessment, asking some questions about their part of the business, what's important. From there, maybe do some customer conversations. Have a couple one-on-one in-depth interviews with customers, or bring a group of customers together. And then from there, explore what you need to do to keep your finger on the pulse of customers over time, whether that is a survey, an advisory board. There's a, but I would start kind of internally, and then do some customer in-depth interviews. If you don't have call center data, if you do, I would start by listening to 10 calls and understanding what type of insights can I get from this data source.
Great. I have another question too, just about when you're working with a client, do you play the recordings during the readout with clients, or is it shared as a pre-read? Like, how does this conversational data come into the story, and how do you present it to the clients?
Yeah, we present it in the presentation. So this they would have heard this with their ears. And it was a 3-minute. So we took small clips from 7 calls and pulled them together. So it's 3 minutes. This one was just 2 calls, and it was also 3 minutes as well. But we do play those in the sessions. It's very common for them to hop into the platform after and pull up the conversation and listen to the full context and things like that. But we share it in the presentation. Last thing that is a part of this story, as an example that we're sharing, is the intervention piece of it. And this is super generic because it's been scrubbed, but the intervention side of the data back story can look like recommendations that you're making. It could look like implications if we don't do this, if we do this. It could be thought starters. We use a variety of approaches to help our clients move from kind of storytelling in the moment to action planning and kind of brainstorming. This is also the first step that the data back storyteller takes to support action by helping the audience kind of understand what are some of the things that we need to do. I've got just 3 thoughts to get started. These are pretty simple, but I would recommend for your efforts in data back storytelling is to find a partner, find a story partner. There's something really beautiful that happens when we collaborate with each other and develop stories together. There's also science out there that shows that our brain waves start to synchronize in that process too. So it's a great, if you can, I would recommend finding a story partner. Already talked about combining both the macro and micro, even if it's just one story that you can tell that kind of highlights the quantitative data that you're making. It helps the light bulb go off in our brains, and then explore and iterate. That there's still a lot to learn. I learn every day about data back storytelling, and would just encourage you to explore and try new things and see what's working and what's not. With that, if you want to learn more, there's a lot of different ways that we can continue the conversation. This QR code it'll take you to a resource that's called Transforming CX with Conversational Data. The Authenticx website, Authenticx with an X at the end.com, has a wealth of information, including we do a monthly newsletter called The Pulse, where we're keeping our audience up to date on conversational AI. Feel free to reach out to me. You've got my email address here. I'm also on LinkedIn regularly and would love to continue our conversation.